Let's bring in Jonathan Turley now, Fox News contributor, George Washington University law professor, and one of the smartest legal brains of our time. And Jonathan, I've been reading tweets all day long, members of Congress saying that this was an illegal operation. They, of course, are harping that it's unjustified and they're going into the politics. But go directly, because you've been tweeting about this morning already. You say that the President Trump is justified in what he has done overnight.
No, he has precedent on his side. What Maduro is going to be re-arguing is essentially the case of Noriega, who we did the same type of operation and sort of a snatch and grab, and then prosecuted him, in that case in Florida. He made many of the arguments that we will expect from Maduro and lost. I mean, and if anything, I think Maduro presents a weaker case than Noriega. I mean, in this case, you have a really extensive record and indictment against Maduro in New York. And, you know, when the Vice President Rodriguez in Caracas says we want proof of life, you'll get that. It's called an arraignment. And he's going to be there in a New York court to answer for these charges. And the charges are, of course, very serious. You know, the United States government has traced various accounts, not just by Maduro, but his henchmen in foreign banks. And they've always alleged that Maduro is at the head of a drug cartel that's pouring drugs into the country. So I think that this is going to be legally accepted by the courts that they had a right to do this. There's obviously going to be challenges, and I don't want to say that something can't be a jump scare or pop out that we'll have a problem with, but Noriega is powerful precedent for this action.
Well, if we're looking at a trial where Maduro defends himself, and I assume that he will, we're looking at a pretty massive trial, you know, on par with some of these other giant sort of international kind of terrorism trials that we've seen over the years. And obviously that kind of thing becomes wall-to-wall coverage. It winds up being, you know, playing out dramatically in our political sphere. Walk us through what you think that could wind up looking like.
Well, you're going to start with threshold challenges that are going to be, as I noted, much like Noriega's challenges, that he was a head of state and had immunity. That's going to be a big problem because he really wasn't the head of state if you ask the people of Venezuela. So the United States and other countries did not recognize that he was elected. To the contrary, they believed his opponent was elected. And instead, they viewed him as a usurper and drug lord. So making a head of state argument is not going to be very, I think, credible in a court of law. But you also had some other arguments that will be made. I think those will fail. And then you're going to be looking at questions of proof. There's a lot of evidence here, and it can become messy. I've done national security cases that were based on foreign intelligence, and I was on the defense side. And you challenge a lot of that stuff because obviously when you're gathering foreign intelligence, you're not doing so for the purposes of a criminal case. So some of that evidence is going to have to be hashed out. But there is a considerable amount of evidence here that they're going to have to address. And even if they lose much of it, they still have a pretty darn powerful case from what we can gather from the 2020 indictment. So this is going to have great ramifications. It's also going to have ramifications in Venezuela because what was described in the 2020 indictment is a comprehensive criminal enterprise that involved a couple of dozen of high-ranking military officers and political figures. Many of them are still in Venezuela. I expect that some of them are going to be interested in cutting a deal.
Right.
But as this indictment goes forward, they are going to be scooped up in this narrative and as co-conspirators.
You know, President Trump is, especially during his first term, he's a guy of action, and he often likes to move quickly. But one of the things that I don't think gets talked about enough in the first year of the second term is the degree to which President Trump has some very, very smart lawyers working for him throughout his administration. They have done a lot of homework, and I think they did a lot of homework between the first term and the second term. where they lined up a lot, and I don't think they get enough credit for this, where they line up a lot of the legal arguments that they need to lay the groundwork so that they can do things, whether it's with the border or a case like this, where when it comes to game time in a courtroom, they've actually laid the groundwork.
No, that's absolutely right. Since 2020, the government has said, we're coming for you. We don't recognize you as president. You're an indicted criminal defendant, and we will come for you. So there hasn't been any ambiguity here. And the president himself has had no ambiguity as a position in the United States, that he had a sort of unblinking reaction to those that saying, well, you can't move against someone, even someone who falsely claims to be the head of state. I mean, look, there's a lot of renaming going on in Washington, D.C., but he may have just renamed the Monroe Doctrine the Trump Doctrine, because this is really the Monroe Doctrine on steroids, and it's going to have an impact on other countries. And the one that obviously is going to be most concerned with is, of course, Cuba. But as we sort of deal with this case, as it unfolds in New York, you're going to have a lot of names coming up who are still out there. And I think you're going to find those people are very likely going to want to cut a deal. The United States government says there is really billions of dollars that have been funneled off by Venezuelan officials as part of the proceeds of this criminal enterprise. That money is also going to be clawed back by whoever, hopefully, from the opposition will take over Venezuela.
Big question there. We shall be following it. Jonathan Turley, thank you, as always, for your legal insight.
I'm Steve Doocy.
I'm Brian Kilmeade.
And I'm Ainsley Earhart. And click here to subscribe to the Fox News YouTube page to catch our hottest interviews and most compelling analysis.